The beginning of kindness. The sun was just rising over the sleepy suburban neighborhood, casting its golden rays through dew-kissed windows. In a modest two-story home on Maple Lane, the kitchen bustled with warmth and activity. 8-year-old Sophie stood on her step stool, carefully stirring batter in a large glass bowl. Her dark brown curls bounced with each motion, and her freckled face was a picture of concentration. "Easy there, sweetheart," said her father, David, as he leaned against the counter with a steaming mug of coffee. He sipped it slowly, watching Sophie with a smile that held equal parts admiration and amusement. "You don't want to wear yourself out before school." Sophie grinned, her tongue peeking out slightly as she focused. "It's for Mr. Tom, Daddy. They have to be perfect." David chuckled. For the past month, every Thursday morning, Sophie had insisted on baking something for Tom, their garbage man. What had started as a spur-of-the-moment thank-you gesture had turned into a full-fledged weekly ritual. She always said, "He looks like he needs cheering up." "All right, let's get these in the oven before we run out of time," David said, moving to help pour the batter into a cupcake tray. The kitchen was already fragrant with the scent of vanilla and cinnamon. As the cupcakes baked, Sophie worked on a colorful card to accompany her treats. She sat at the dining table, her crayons spread out around her like a painter's palette. She hummed quietly, her small hands crafting rainbows and hearts with a precision that seemed almost magical. "Do you think Mr. Tom likes rainbows, Daddy?" Sophie asked, glancing up. "I think he'll love whatever you make," David replied. He didn't add that Mr. Tom seemed to treasure these gifts far more than he might admit. The man's weathered face always broke into a rare, genuine smile when Sophie bounded down the driveway with her box of baked goods. The rhythmic hum of the garbage truck grew louder as it approached their home. Sophie's excitement was palpable. She hurriedly packed her cupcakes into a small, neatly decorated box, tied it with a bright blue ribbon, and darted out the front door just as the truck rolled to a stop. "Good morning, Miss Sophie," Tom called out, stepping down from the cab. His weathered hands were already outstretched to accept the box she carried. His uniform was neatly pressed despite his long, grueling route. "Good morning, Mr. Tom," Sophie chirped, holding up the box. "I made these just for you." Tom knelt slightly, his towering frame making him seem like a giant next to Sophie. He opened the box and marveled at the perfectly frosted cupcakes inside. "Well, aren't these something special?" "You're spoiling me, kiddo." Sophie beamed. "They have star sprinkles this time. You said stars make you think of wishes." Tom's expression softened, and he nodded. "That they do, sweetheart. That they do." David watched from the porch as the two exchanged smiles. He couldn't help but notice how Tom's entire demeanor shifted when Sophie approached him, how his usual fatigue seemed to melt away in the presence of her bright, unwavering kindness. It wasn't just gratitude for the treats, David realized. It was something deeper. "See you next Thursday," Sophie called as Tom climbed back into his truck. "You bet, Sophie," Tom replied, his voice lighter than it had been when he arrived. Later that evening, as David sat in his home office sorting through paperwork, the memory of Tom's smile lingered in his mind. It wasn't just happiness, David thought. It was relief. Hope. Something about it struck a chord in him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Tom's story than met the eye. Unable to focus on his work, David called his friend Mike, a retired journalist with a knack for uncovering hidden truths. "Hey, Mike," David began after exchanging pleasantries. "Have you ever looked at someone and felt like they were carrying something heavy?" "Sounds like a loaded question," Mike replied. "Who are we talking about?" "Our garbage man, Tom." David leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. "Sophie's been giving him cupcakes every week, and every time, it's like he lights up in a way I've never seen before. It's not just about the cupcakes, Mike. There's something else there." "Could be," Mike said thoughtfully. "You planning to dig into it?" "I don't know. It feels invasive. But I can't shake the feeling that he needs help, or at least someone to talk to." "Follow your gut," David, Mike advised. But tread carefully. People carry their burdens in their own way. That night, David lay awake long after Sophie had fallen asleep, staring at the ceiling as the words, "It's like wishes coming true," echoed in his mind. He resolved to learn more about Tom, not out of idle curiosity, but out of a genuine desire to understand, and maybe to help. What David didn't know was how much his curiosity would uncover. Tom wasn't just a hard-working garbage man. He was a man with a past, a man who had weathered storms that would break most. And the simple kindness of an 8-year-old girl was about to shine a light into corners of his life he had long kept hidden. Following the trail. The following Thursday morning began like any other, with the familiar routine of Sophie's determined baking. This time, she insisted on using red and gold sprinkles, declaring, "They look like firecrackers, Daddy. Maybe they'll make Mr. Tom feel super happy today." David smiled at her earnestness, but couldn't shake his growing curiosity. Sophie's weekly ritual of giving cupcakes had become more than just a cheerful gesture. It had become a puzzle he felt compelled to solve. As Sophie skipped off to school, David stood on the front porch, his arms crossed as he watched Tom's truck disappear down the street. The smile on Tom's face after receiving Sophie's cupcakes was brighter than ever, but David couldn't ignore the deep lines etched around the man's eyes, nor the way his shoulders slumped when he thought no one was watching. Today, David had cleared his schedule. He grabbed his keys and stepped into his car, determined to follow Tom and learn more about his life. He felt a twinge of guilt. It wasn't his usual way to meddle, but he reminded himself that his intentions were good. Maybe, just maybe, he could help. David kept a respectful distance as Tom navigated the truck through the neighborhood. He watched as Tom worked efficiently, lifting garbage bins with ease and returning them neatly to their places. The man's attention to detail struck David. Even in a job most people took for granted, Tom took pride in his work. The route wound through streets David rarely visited, eventually leading into the city's industrial district. David expected Tom to head to the landfill or the recycling plant, but instead, the truck pulled into the parking lot of an old brick building with a weathered sign that read Cedar Hope Center. David parked discreetly across the street and watched as Tom climbed down from the cab. He retrieved several boxes from the back of the truck, one of them unmistakably Sophie's cupcake box, and carried them inside. Curiosity burned brighter in David's chest. What was a garbage man doing at a community center with boxes of treats? After a few moments of hesitation, David stepped out of his car and approached the building. He pushed open the door, the scent of fresh coffee and baked goods greeting him. The bustling activity inside was unexpected. Volunteers moved about, organizing shelves, packing food boxes, and chatting warmly. It was clear that this was more than just a community center. It was a lifeline for people in need. David's eyes scanned the room until they landed on Tom, who had shed his uniform jacket and donned an apron. He was at ease here, laughing with the volunteers and expertly arranging Sophie's cupcakes on a tray alongside other baked goods. He moved with the confidence of someone who knew this space well. "Mr. Tom," David called out hesitantly, stepping further inside. Tom turned, his face registering both surprise and unease. "David, what are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same," David replied, his tone light but curious. "I didn't know you were involved with the community center." Tom sighed, wiping his hands on his apron. "Yeah, well, it's something I do on the side. Keeps me grounded." David gestured toward the cupcakes and Sophie's treats. "You bring them here." Tom nodded, his expression softening. "Those cupcakes are the highlight of the week for the kids who come here. They're simple, but they mean a lot." David's curiosity deepened. "You seem pretty comfortable here. Have you been doing this for a while?" "Since the beginning," Tom admitted, motioning for David to follow him into a quieter corner of the center. "When this place opened a few years ago, I started volunteering. I needed something to do, something to feel useful again." David tilted his head, sensing there was more to the story. Why did you need that, Tom? For a moment, Tom hesitated, his eyes distant. Then he sighed deeply and leaned against the wall. Because I lost everything, David. My family, my career, my sense of purpose. Tom's story unfolded like a tightly held secret finally being released. Years ago, he had been a chef and owner of a thriving restaurant downtown. It had been his dream, his pride and joy. The restaurant had become a beloved staple of the community, a place where families celebrated milestones and friends gathered for special occasions. But one night, a kitchen fire had ripped through the building. Despite his staff's quick action, the fire spread rapidly, destroying everything. The insurance payout barely covered his debts, and the emotional toll was devastating. His wife, unable to handle the strain, had left shortly after. Alone and adrift, Tom had taken the garbage truck job as a way to make ends meet. This place, Tom said, gesturing to the center around them. It saved me. When I started volunteering, I realized I could still make a difference. I didn't need a fancy kitchen or a restaurant. I just needed to show up and care. David listened intently, his heart heavy with the weight of Tom's words. He suddenly understood why Sophie's cupcakes meant so much. They weren't just treats, they were a reminder of a time when Tom had felt fulfilled and valued. Later that evening, David shared the day's events with Sophie. She listened wide-eyed, her small hands gripping the edge of the dining table. "Mr. Tom used to be a chef?" she asked, her voice filled with awe. "Like the kind on TV?" "Exactly like that," David replied with a smile. "And now he's helping people here at the community center." Sophie's face lit up with an idea. "Daddy, what if we help him? Like he helps other people. Maybe we can make him a chef again." David chuckled at her enthusiasm, but couldn't deny the thought had already crossed his mind. "It's a big dream, sweetheart. But maybe we can start small. What do you say we visit the center this weekend and see if we can pitch in?" "Yes," Sophie exclaimed, clapping her hands. "And I can bake even more cupcakes." As David tucked Sophie into bed that night, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Tom's story was far from over, and he was determined to help write the next chapter. What began as a child's simple gesture of kindness had opened a door to something much larger, a chance to rekindle hope in a man who had nearly lost it all. David didn't know exactly how they would help Tom reclaim his dream, but he knew they would find a way, one cupcake at a time. Rekindling the flame. Saturday morning dawned bright and cool, the early autumn breeze carrying the hint of crisp leaves and promise. Sophie was up before the sun, bouncing with excitement as she packed her baking supplies into a large tote bag. Her father, David, sipped his coffee, already anticipating the day ahead. The plan was simple. They would join Tom at the community center, help however they could, and begin brainstorming ways to support Tom's rediscovered passion for cooking. "You think Mr. Tom will like my new idea?" Sophie asked, holding up a sketch of a cupcake tower she had designed, each layer featuring a different theme. "This one is smiley faces, and the top layer is stars, like wishes." David smiled at her boundless creativity. "I think he'll love it, sweetheart." The community center was already bustling with activity when they arrived. Volunteers moved with purpose, restocking shelves and preparing food packages for families in need. The air was filled with the comforting aroma of fresh bread and the chatter of people working together. Tom greeted them at the door, his apron already dusted with flour. His face lit up when he saw Sophie holding her tote bag. "Well, if it isn't my favorite baker," he said warmly. "What's in the bag today?" "Surprises," Sophie exclaimed, grinning. "Daddy and I are here to help." David shook Tom's hand. "We're here for anything you need, Tom. Just tell us where we can pitch in." Tom hesitated for a moment, then nodded toward the kitchen. "We could always use an extra set of hands in there. Sophie, you can help me with something special I'm working on." Inside the kitchen, Tom led Sophie to a large counter where an assortment of ingredients was laid out. "We're making bread today," he said, rolling up his sleeves. "Have you ever kneaded dough before?" Sophie shook her head, her curls bouncing. No, but I want to learn. Tom demonstrated the process with patience, guiding Sophie as she pressed and folded the dough with her small hands. You're a natural, he said, watching her enthusiasm. I bet you could make your own recipe someday. David, meanwhile, worked alongside other volunteers to prepare trays of vegetables and soups for the lunch program. As he chopped carrots, he couldn't help but watch Tom interact with the other volunteers. There was a certain energy about him when he was in the kitchen, an ease, a confidence that transformed him. It was clear that this was where Tom belonged. During a break, David joined Tom at a table near the window. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, sipping coffee and watching Sophie chat animatedly with some of the younger volunteers. You're really good with her, you know, David said, breaking the quiet. Tom smiled faintly. Kids have a way of seeing the best in people. Sophie's cupcakes, they remind me of why I started cooking in the first place. Food is more than just something you eat. It's a way to connect, to make people feel cared for. David leaned forward, his tone turning serious. Tom, have you ever thought about getting back into the culinary world? Opening another restaurant, maybe? Tom's smile faltered, and he shook his head. I wouldn't even know where to start. Besides, that fire. He trailed off, his eyes darkening. David placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. That was years ago, Tom. You've spent so much time helping others here. Don't you think it's time to start thinking about your own dreams again? Tom sighed, his gaze distant. It's not that simple, David. A restaurant takes money, time, and a lot of energy. I'm not sure I have it in me anymore. Maybe you don't have to do it alone, David said, an idea forming in his mind. What if we work together? A community project, something that combines your love of cooking with what you've built here at the center. Tom raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. What kind of project? David smiled. Let's start small. A charity dinner. You plan the menu, cook the food, and we'll use the proceeds to fund programs here at the center. It'll be a way to remind yourself, and the world, of what you're capable of. Tom agreed, though tentatively, and the planning began that very afternoon. David rallied a group of volunteers to help with logistics, while Tom brainstormed a menu that would showcase his culinary expertise. Sophie, of course, insisted on having a dessert table featuring her cupcakes. Over the next few weeks, the community center buzzed with excitement as word spread about the upcoming event. Local businesses donated ingredients, while artists and craftspeople offered their talents to decorate the space. David used his connections to secure a band for live music, and Sophie worked tirelessly to perfect her cupcake recipes. The night of the charity dinner arrived, and the community center had been transformed into a warm, inviting space. Twinkling string lights hung from the ceiling, and tables were adorned with simple yet elegant centerpieces of fresh flowers and candles. The air was alive with the sounds of laughter, music, and the clinking of glasses. Tom stood in the kitchen, his white chef's coat crisp and clean, his hands moving deftly as he plated dishes. Each plate was a work of art, showcasing vibrant colors and bold flavors. For the first time in years, he felt the familiar thrill of being in his element. David watched from the doorway, marveling at the transformation. Tom was a different man tonight, focused, passionate, and alive. The dinner was a resounding success. Guests raved about the food, and the dessert table was a hit, with Sophie's cupcakes disappearing almost as quickly as they were placed. As the night drew to a close, Tom stood at the front of the room, addressing the crowd. His voice trembled slightly at first, but it grew stronger as he spoke. I used to think my best days were behind me, he said, his gaze sweeping the room. But tonight, you've shown me that it's never too late to start again. Thank you for believing in me. The applause that followed was thunderous, echoing through the space and filling Tom's heart with hope. Later that night, as David and Sophie helped clean up, Tom pulled David aside. You were right, he admitted. This feels like the beginning of something. David clapped him on the back. It is, Tom. It's just the start. Tom smiled, a spark of determination in his eyes. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to dream, not just for himself, but for the community that had lifted him up. Little did he know, this was only the beginning of a journey that would change all their lives forever. A community rises. The morning after the charity dinner, the community center buzzed with a lingering energy from the previous night's success. Volunteers shared stories as they cleaned up the remnants of the event, while others packed leftover food to distribute to local families. The atmosphere was one of celebration and accomplishment. Tom arrived early, still in a bit of disbelief over the turnout and the overwhelming support. The praise for his food had been effusive, and the evening had raised enough funds to keep the center running for several months. But what stayed with him most was the sense of purpose he had felt in the kitchen, something he hadn't experienced in years. David arrived shortly after, carrying a box of fresh donuts and a thermos of coffee. He found Tom in the kitchen, wiping down counters with a contented expression. "Morning, chef," David said with a grin, setting the box on the counter. Tom chuckled. "I'm not sure I've earned that title back yet." David poured 2 cups of coffee and handed one to Tom. "You're being modest. Last night was incredible, Tom. People are still talking about it. In fact, I've already had a few people ask when the next event will be." Tom raised an eyebrow. "The next event? Why not?" David said, leaning against the counter. "Last night wasn't just about raising money. It was about showing what's possible when the community comes together. And if you're willing, I think we can do even more." Tom hesitated, the thought both exciting and overwhelming. "What are you suggesting?" David took a sip of his coffee, his expression thoughtful. "A series of events. Cooking classes, pop-up dinners, maybe even a community cookbook. We could make this a regular thing, with you at the center of it. The funds we raise could go toward expanding the center's programs, and maybe even something bigger down the line." "Something bigger," Tom echoed, his brow furrowing. David's eyes gleamed with possibility. A permanent space, a community cafe, maybe. A place where people can come together over good food, where you can mentor young chefs and share your passion. The idea hung in the air between them, tantalizing but daunting. In the weeks that followed, the idea began to take shape. David and Tom formed a small committee of volunteers to help plan the next steps. The group met regularly at the community center, brainstorming ideas and dividing tasks. Sophie, of course, insisted on being part of the team, her enthusiasm infectious. Their first project was a series of cooking classes aimed at teaching families how to prepare healthy, affordable meals. Tom designed the curriculum, drawing on years of experience, and the response from the community was immediate and enthusiastic. The classes filled up within days, and local businesses stepped forward to donate ingredients and supplies. The first class took place in the center's kitchen, which had been transformed into a teaching space. Tom stood at the front, his chef's coat crisp and white, as he introduced himself to the attendees, a mix of parents, teenagers, and even a few retirees. "Cooking isn't just about feeding yourself," Tom began, his voice steady and warm. "It's about connecting with your ingredients, your culture, and the people around you. Tonight, we're going to make something simple but special: homemade pasta." The group listened intently as Tom demonstrated how to mix and knead the dough, his hands moving with practiced ease. He walked among the participants, offering guidance and encouragement, his confidence growing with each interaction. By the end of the class, the room was filled with laughter and the aroma of freshly cooked pasta. Participants beamed with pride as they sampled their creations, and several approached Tom to thank him personally. Meanwhile, David focused on spreading the word about their initiatives. He set up social media accounts for the community center, posting updates, photos, and testimonials from participants. He also reached out to local media, and soon a feature story about Tom and the cooking classes appeared in the town's newspaper. The article highlighted not only Tom's culinary talent, but also his journey of resilience and his commitment to giving back. The headline read, "From Fire to Flower, a chef reclaims his passion while feeding the community." The story caught the attention of a local business owner, Claire, who ran a popular bakery downtown. She showed up unannounced one afternoon, introducing herself to Tom as he was unloading a shipment of produce. "I read about what you're doing," Claire said, her eyes bright with excitement. "And I'd love to help. I have extra kitchen space at my bakery that's unused in the evenings. If you ever want to host a pop-up dinner or a class, you're welcome to use it." Tom was floored by the offer. "That's incredibly generous of you," he said, shaking her hand. "I'll definitely take you up on that." With Claire's support, the team launched their first pop-up dinner, transforming the bakery into an intimate dining space for an evening. Tickets sold out within hours, and the event drew a mix of regulars and newcomers curious about Tom's cooking. The menu featured dishes inspired by Tom's childhood: hearty stews, fresh salads, and a decadent bread pudding that had been his grandmother's recipe. Each course was paired with a story, and by the end of the night, the guests felt not only well-fed but deeply connected to Tom's journey. Sophie played a starring role at the dessert table, proudly serving her cupcakes and charming everyone with her stories. When asked about her baking inspiration, she simply replied, "I just wanted to make Mr. Tom smile." As the months went on, the momentum grew. The pop-up dinners became a regular fixture, and the cooking classes expanded to include advanced techniques and specialty cuisines. Tom began mentoring a group of young aspiring chefs, teaching them not just the skills of the kitchen, but the values of hard work and community. Through it all, the dream of a permanent cafe remained in the background, a goal that felt both tantalizingly close and frustratingly out of reach. But David and Tom refused to give up. They continued to save the proceeds from their events, and the support from the community only deepened. One day, as Tom was walking through the center's bustling kitchen, he paused to take it all in: the laughter, the teamwork, the shared joy of creating something meaningful. For the first time in years, he felt not just hopeful but certain. "We're really doing this," he said quietly to David, who was checking inventory nearby. David looked up and grinned. "We are. And this is just the beginning." Unbeknownst to them, a turning point was just around the corner, one that would test their resilience, but also bring their vision closer to reality. The flame Tom had once thought extinguished was burning brighter than ever, fueled by the power of community and the unyielding belief that small acts of kindness could lead to something extraordinary. Dreams in the making. The following months brought a whirlwind of activity, challenges, and unexpected breakthroughs. Tom and David, along with their growing team of volunteers and supporters, worked tirelessly to bring their dream of a community cafe closer to reality. The pop-up dinners continued to thrive, with each event bringing in more funds and attention. Local newspapers and blogs regularly featured stories about Tom's journey, drawing visitors from neighboring towns. Even Sophie had become a small-town celebrity of sorts, her cupcake recipes now a beloved staple at every event. But despite their growing success, the team still faced a daunting challenge: finding a permanent space. Every property they considered was either too expensive, too small, or required renovations they couldn't afford. The dream felt tantalizingly close yet frustratingly out of reach. One crisp October morning, David sat at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in hand, and a stack of property listings spread out before him. Sophie, perched on a stool nearby, was busy decorating a batch of cupcakes for the day's cooking class. "You look like a detective, Daddy," Sophie said, giggling, as she carefully placed star-shaped sprinkles on a cupcake. David chuckled. "I feel like one. Finding the right place for this cafe is turning out to be harder than I thought." "Maybe you need to wish on a star," Sophie suggested, her tone serious despite her playful smile. David paused, considering her words. "You might be onto something, kiddo." Just then, his phone buzzed with a text. It was from Claire, the bakery owner who had lent them her space for the pop-up dinners. The message was short but intriguing. "I think I've found something you'll want to see. Call me." That afternoon, David and Tom met Claire outside a building on Maple Street, just a few blocks from the heart of downtown. The structure was a charming mix of brick and wood, with large windows that invited sunlight to stream inside. A faded sign above the door read Maple Street Diner. "I've had my eye on this place for a while," Claire explained as she unlocked the door. "The previous owner retired a few years ago, and it's been sitting empty ever since. I know the property manager. They're willing to negotiate if it's for a community-focused project like yours." Inside, the space was even more promising. The main dining area featured high ceilings and an open layout that felt inviting and spacious. The kitchen, though outdated, was fully equipped and functional. In the back, there was a small room that could easily be transformed into a private dining space or a teaching kitchen. Tom ran his hand along the counter, his mind already racing with possibilities. This could work," he said, his voice filled with cautious optimism. David nodded, his excitement growing. "It's perfect. How do we make it happen?" Claire smiled. "I'll connect you with the property manager, and if you need help with financing, I know a few people who might be interested in supporting something like this." The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, negotiations, and planning. The property manager, impressed by Tom's story and the community's enthusiasm, agreed to lease the space at a discounted rate. Claire introduced them to a local investor who offered to cover the initial renovation costs in exchange for a small equity stake in the cafe. With the lease signed and funding secured, the real work began. Volunteers from the community came out in droves to help transform the space. Carpenters rebuilt the counters, artists painted murals on the walls, and electricians upgraded the wiring in the kitchen. Even the local hardware store owner donated supplies, saying, "This town needs a place like this." Sophie, of course, was a constant presence, her boundless energy and optimism keeping everyone's spirits high. She even organized a Kids' Day, where local children helped paint flower pots for the cafe's decor. As the renovation progressed, Tom and David began focusing on the menu. They wanted it to reflect not just Tom's culinary expertise, but also the community's diversity and values. "We need something for everyone," Tom said during one of their planning sessions. "Comfort food, healthy options, vegetarian dishes, and of course, Sophie's cupcakes." Sophie grinned. "I'll make new ones for every season. Pumpkin spice for fall, peppermint for winter." Tom laughed, ruffling her hair. "You're hired." The team also decided to include a pay-it-forward program, where customers could purchase meals in advance for those in need. It was a small gesture, but one that aligned perfectly with the cafe's mission of fostering connection and generosity. As opening day approached, the excitement in the town was palpable. Social media buzzed with posts about the cafe, and the local news station aired a feature on Tom's journey. People stopped Tom on the street to wish him luck, their words of encouragement reminding him just how far he had come. But not everything went smoothly. A week before the opening, a plumbing issue in the kitchen threatened to derail their timeline. The stress weighed heavily on Tom, who found himself doubting whether they could pull it off. David, sensing his friend's anxiety, pulled him aside. "Tom, take a breath," he said. "This is just a bump in the road. We've overcome worse." Tom nodded, though his shoulders remained tense. "I just don't want to let anyone down." "You won't," David said firmly. "We're in this together, remember." Finally, the day arrived. The cafe, now officially named the Maple Hearth, stood ready to welcome its first customers. The space was warm and inviting, with wooden tables, cozy seating, and vibrant murals that celebrated the town's history and spirit. The ribbon-cutting ceremony drew a crowd that spilled onto the sidewalk. Tom, standing at the entrance with Sophie and David, felt a lump in his throat as he looked out at the sea of familiar faces. He took a deep breath and spoke. "This cafe isn't just mine," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "It's ours. It's a testament to what we can achieve when we come together. Thank you for believing in me and in this dream." With Sophie's help, Tom cut the ribbon, and the crowd erupted into cheers. The doors opened, and the cave came to life. Inside, the air buzzed with laughter and conversation as customers enjoyed their meals. Tom moved through the space, greeting guests and making sure everything was running smoothly. In the kitchen, his staff worked with precision and care, their enthusiasm matching his own. At one corner table, Sophie proudly served her cupcakes to a group of kids, her smile as bright as the stars she loved to decorate with. As the evening wore on, Tom found a moment to himself. He stood near the window, watching the activity inside and the lights twinkling outside. For the first time in years, he felt not just hopeful but whole. David joined him, holding 2 cups of coffee. "We did it," he said, handing one to Tom. Tom nodded, his eyes glistening. "We did, and this is just the beginning." The Maple Hearth wasn't just a cafe. It was a symbol of resilience, a place where the past and present came together to create something extraordinary. And for Tom, it was proof that even the smallest acts of kindness, like a child's cupcakes, could lead to dreams rekindled and a community united. A legacy of kindness. The months after the opening of the Maple Hearth flew by in a blur of success, challenges, and heartfelt moments. The cafe quickly became a beloved hub for the community, drawing people from all walks of life. Whether it was the irresistible smell of freshly baked bread, Sophie's ever-changing cupcake flavors, or Tom's signature dishes, the space was always buzzing with life and connection. But as the cafe flourished, Tom and David began to see that their vision was growing beyond what they had originally imagined. The Maple Hearth was no longer just a cafe, it had become a movement. A new purpose emerges. One crisp winter morning, Tom arrived at the cafe early, as he always did, to prepare for the day. Snow dusted the streets, and the cafe's windows glowed warmly from the light inside. He stepped into the kitchen and found Sophie there, bundled in a puffy jacket, diligently working on a batch of cupcakes. "You're up early," Tom said, his voice teasing but affectionate. Sophie beamed at him. "I wanted to make snowflake cupcakes. They're for the kids coming to the lunch program today." Tom's heart swelled with pride. Sophie's kindness and creativity never ceased to amaze him. "They'll love them," he said. "You've got a gift, Sophie." As the morning progressed, volunteers arrived to help with the cafe's growing community outreach programs. The weekly lunch program for low-income families had become one of their most impactful initiatives, and every Thursday, the cafe opened its doors to anyone in need of a warm meal and a welcoming smile. David arrived mid-morning, carrying a stack of documents and looking unusually serious. He found Tom in the office, going over the day's schedule. "Tom, we need to talk," David began, setting the papers down. "I've been reviewing our numbers, and there's something we need to address." Tom leaned back in his chair, bracing himself. "What is it?" David hesitated before speaking. "The demand for our programs is outpacing our resources. We're helping so many people, but if we keep growing at this rate, we're going to need more space, more funding, more everything." Tom frowned, his mind racing. He had always known that running a community-focused cafe would be challenging, but the thought of scaling up felt overwhelming. "What do you think we should do?" Tom asked. David's expression softened. "I think we need to expand. Not just the cafe, but the entire idea. What if the Maple Hearth became more than one location? What if we built a network of spaces like this? Places where people can connect, learn, and give back." Tom stared at him, the enormity of the idea sinking in. It was bold, ambitious, and completely terrifying. "Do you really think we can pull it off?" Tom asked, his voice filled with both doubt and hope. David smiled. "We've already proven that a simple idea can change lives. Why not dream bigger?" The mentor program. As the idea of expansion took root, Tom and David decided to pilot their vision by launching a mentorship program. The goal was to train aspiring chefs and restaurateurs not only in culinary skills, but also in how to run community-focused businesses. The first group of mentees included a diverse mix of individuals: a single mother passionate about baking, a young man recently released from prison who wanted to turn his life around, and a high school senior dreaming of opening her own food truck. Tom took them under his wing, teaching them everything from knife skills to balancing a budget. The program quickly became a cornerstone of the Maple Hearth, drawing attention from local media and inspiring other businesses to launch similar initiatives. One day, after a particularly successful mentorship event, Tom stood in the kitchen with his mentees, watching them laugh and bond over a new recipe they had just mastered. "This is what it's all about," Tom said quietly to David, who was leaning against the counter, sipping his coffee. "Not just feeding people, but giving them the tools to build something for themselves." A visit from an old friend. One snowy afternoon, as the cafe hummed with its usual activity, Tom was surprised to see a familiar face walk through the door. Marcus, his former sous chef, and the man who had once sabotaged his dreams. Marcus approached hesitantly, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his coat. "Hey, Tom," he said, his voice low. Tom froze for a moment, memories of their past flooding back. But then he saw the look in Marcus's eyes: guilt, regret, and something else: hope. "What are you doing here?" Tom asked, his tone measured. "I heard about what you're doing," Marcus said, glancing around the cafe. "And I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed you to know that I changed." Tom studied him, his emotions swirling. After a long pause, he said, "Do you still love cooking?" Marcus blinked, surprised. "I do," he admitted, "but I haven't stepped into a kitchen in years." Tom nodded slowly. "Then maybe it's time you did. We're always looking for volunteers here." Marcus's eyes widened. "You'd let me help? After what I did?" Tom smiled faintly. "Everyone deserves a second chance, Marcus. I'm living proof of that." Expanding the vision. Months turned into years, and the Maple Hearth became more than a cafe. It became a symbol of what a community could achieve when it came together. Tom and David opened a second location in a neighboring town, using the same model of combining a cafe with community programs and mentorship opportunities. Then a third. Each location was unique, reflecting the character of its community, but all carried the same spirit of kindness and connection. The original cafe remained the heart of the operation, and Sophie, now a teenager, continued to play an active role. Her cupcakes had become legendary, and she even started hosting her own baking workshops for kids. One evening, as the cafe celebrated its 5th anniversary, Tom stood on the small stage in the main dining area, addressing a packed room of friends, family, and supporters. "When we started this journey," he began, his voice filled with emotion, "I never could have imagined where it would lead. What began as a child's simple act of kindness, a box of cupcakes, has grown into something bigger than any of us. This cafe isn't just about food. It's about hope. It's about second chances. And it's about the power of community." The room erupted into applause, and Tom's eyes found Sophie in the crowd. She was smiling at him, her eyes shining with pride. A legacy of hope. Years later, the Maple Hearth had grown into a network of 10 cafes across the region, each one a thriving hub of community life. Tom, now semi-retired, spent his days mentoring the next generation of chefs and overseeing the foundation he and David had established to support local food programs. Sophie, now an adult, had taken over much of the day-to-day operations, bringing her own flair and vision to the business. But she never stopped baking cupcakes, always remembering the small act that had started it all. As Tom sat in his favorite corner of the original cafe one quiet afternoon, watching the bustle of activity around him, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. The fire that had once destroyed his dream had led to something even greater. And it all began with a little girl, a garbage man, and a box of cupcakes. The legacy of the maple hearth was one of resilience, generosity, and the belief that even the smallest kindness could spark something extraordinary. And that legacy would continue to grow, inspiring generations to come. The ripple effect. 10 years had passed since the grand opening of the maple hearth, and the legacy of kindness it had sparked continued to grow. What had begun as a single cafe in a small town had blossomed into a regional movement, touching countless lives and proving that the power of community could transform even the simplest ideas into something extraordinary. Tom, now fully retired from day-to-day operations, often reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. He found himself visiting the original maple hearth on quiet mornings, sipping his coffee in the corner and watching the staff and customers bring the space to life. Each visit reminded him of how far they had come, and how much further they could still go. A call for help. One sunny morning, Tom was enjoying his usual routine at the cafe when his phone buzzed with a call from David. "Morning, chef," David said warmly, using the nickname that had become their tradition. "Got a minute?" "Always," Tom replied, leaning back in his chair. "What's on your mind?" "Do you remember the old textile mill over in Greenwood?" David asked, his tone carrying a hint of excitement. Tom furrowed his brow, trying to place the memory. "Yeah, the one that shut down years ago." "Why?" David's voice quickened. "The town's council reached out to us. They're looking for ways to revitalize the area, and they've heard about what we've done with the maple hearth. They're offering us the mill as a potential site for something new." Tom sat up straighter, his coffee momentarily forgotten. "The mill. That place is massive." "Exactly," David said. "It's too big for just a cafe, but it could be the perfect space for something more. A community hub. Think expanded kitchen facilities, a larger teaching space, maybe even a small farm-to-table market." Tom's mind began to race with possibilities. The mill could become a beacon for the entire region, a place where people could gather, learn, and create. But it was also a daunting challenge, requiring resources, planning, and an unwavering commitment. "Let's see it," Tom said after a moment. "If this is what I think it is, it could be our biggest project yet." The vision takes shape. A week later, Tom, David, and Sophie met at the old mill, which stood on the outskirts of Greenwood like a monument to the past. The brick exterior was weathered but sturdy, and its tall windows let in streams of sunlight that illuminated the cavernous interior. As they walked through the space, Sophie's eyes lit up with excitement. "We could do so much here," she said, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "Imagine a bakery section over there, a teaching kitchen in that corner, and maybe even a community dining hall in the back." Tom nodded, his own excitement growing. "We could host large-scale events, offer more advanced classes, and even provide space for local artisans and farmers to sell their goods." David added, "And with a little landscaping, the outdoor space could host seasonal markets or even garden workshops. The possibilities are endless." Over the next few months, the team worked tirelessly to bring their vision to life. They held town hall meetings to gather input from the community, launched a crowdfunding campaign to raise additional funds, and partnered with local businesses and organizations eager to support the project. The work wasn't without its challenges. Restoring the mill required significant renovations and unexpected setbacks, like delays in permits and budget overruns, tested their resolve. But each time they hit a roadblock, the community rallied around them, offering their time, expertise, and encouragement. The Greenwood Community Hub. 2 years later, the Greenwood Community Hub officially opened its doors. The transformation of the old mill was nothing short of breathtaking. The interior had been reimagined into a vibrant, multi-use space featuring a state-of-the-art teaching kitchen, a spacious dining hall, a bakery, and a marketplace stocked with local produce and handmade goods. The opening ceremony drew visitors from across the region, including former mentees of Tom's mentorship program, local chefs, and even government officials inspired by the project's impact. Sophie, now a seasoned entrepreneur in her own right, delivered the keynote speech, her voice brimming with pride. "This hub represents everything we believe in," she said, standing on the stage in the main hall. "It's a place where people can come together to learn, share, and grow. It's proof that small acts of kindness can ripple outward and create something extraordinary." Tom watched from the audience, his heart swelling with emotion. As Sophie spoke, he thought about how much she had grown, not just as a baker, but as a leader, carrying forward the legacy they had built together. The next generation. The hub quickly became a centerpiece of the community. Its teaching programs expanded to include workshops on sustainable farming, food preservation, and entrepreneurship. Local artists and musicians performed regularly in the dining hall, turning the space into a cultural haven. The marketplace thrived, giving small-scale farmers and artisans a platform to reach wider audiences. Tom, though officially retired, couldn't resist staying involved. He became a mentor to the hub's new instructors, sharing his wisdom and experience while encouraging them to bring their own creativity to the table. One of the most rewarding aspects of the hub was seeing the impact it had on the next generation. Young mentees, inspired by Tom and Sophie's story, began creating their own projects, from food trucks to neighborhood gardens. The hub became a launching pad for their dreams, proving that community support could turn even the smallest ideas into reality. A visit from an unexpected guest. One afternoon, as Tom was tidying up in the bakery section of the hub, he noticed a familiar face at the door. Marcus, his former sous chef, and now a reformed member of the culinary world, stepped inside, carrying a small, carefully wrapped package. "Marcus," Tom said, his tone warm, "what brings you here?" Marcus smiled shyly, setting the package on the counter. "I wanted to thank you for everything, for giving me a second chance, for believing in me when I didn't deserve it." Tom opened the package to reveal a beautifully crafted bread loaf, its crust golden and intricately scored. "You've been practicing," Tom said with a smile. Marcus nodded. "I started a small bakery in my town. It's nothing fancy, but it's mine, and I wouldn't have done it without you." Tom's eyes misted over as he clasped Marcus's hand. "I'm proud of you. You've come a long way. A legacy secured." Years later, as Tom sat on the porch of his home, now overlooking a thriving cafe and community hub, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. From the ashes of his old restaurant to the bustling energy of the Maple Hearth and the Greenwood Community Hub, he had witnessed firsthand how kindness, perseverance, and a shared vision could transform lives. Sophie joined him on the porch, holding 2 cups of tea. She had taken over as the official leader of their growing network, her energy and passion breathing new life into every project. "You know," Sophie said, handing Tom a cup, "it all started with cupcakes." Tom chuckled, the sound rich with gratitude. "It did. And look where we are now." As they sat together, watching the sun set over the community they had helped build, Tom felt a profound sense of peace. The legacy of the Maple Hearth wasn't just a story of resilience or success. It was a testament to the power of small acts of kindness and the way they could ripple outward, creating waves of change. And in that moment, he knew that legacy would endure, carried forward by the people whose lives it had touched, for generations to come. Building bridges beyond boundaries. The Greenwood Community Hub had been thriving for several years, with its impact rippling across the region. It wasn't just a hub for food and learning. It had become a symbol of what people could accomplish when they came together. The hub's success had inspired communities far beyond Greenwood to think about how they could revitalize their own spaces and foster connection. Tom, now in his 70s, often joked that he had finally retired for good, though his presence was still felt at every event. Sophie, who had grown into a confident and visionary leader, had taken the helm of their network, expanding its reach in ways even Tom hadn't imagined. One cold winter morning, as Tom sat in his favorite corner of the Maple Hearth, a young man approached his table. He was dressed in a simple jacket, his hands trembling slightly as he clutched a notebook. "Mr. Clark?" the young man asked hesitantly. Tom looked up, his warm smile immediately putting the man at ease. "That's me. What can I do for you?" "My name is Ethan," the young man said, his voice trembling slightly. "I'm from Ridgewood, a town about 50 miles north. I've heard about what you've built here, and, well, we need something like this in Ridgewood." Tom gestured to the empty seat across from him. "Tell me more." The Ridgewood Challenge. Ethan explained that Ridgewood, once a bustling mill town, had fallen on hard times. Its main industries had collapsed, leaving many residents unemployed. The town's small businesses had withered, and its community spaces were neglected. "Our community feels disconnected," Ethan said, his eyes heavy with concern. "We've lost the sense of togetherness that makes a town feel like home. But when I heard about what you did here, I thought, maybe we can bring that back." Tom listened intently, his mind already racing. He had seen the transformative power of community-driven projects, and Ethan's determination reminded him of his own early days with David and Sophie. "You've got the right idea, Ethan," Tom said after a thoughtful pause. "But building something like this isn't just about the space, it's about the people. You need a team, partners, and a clear vision." Ethan nodded, flipping open his notebook to reveal sketches and notes. "I've been working on some ideas. I just don't know where to start." Tom smiled, a spark of excitement flickering in his chest. "You've already started. Let me introduce you to some people who can help." Mentorship for the future. Over the next few weeks, Tom and Sophie worked closely with Ethan, helping him refine his vision and connect with the resources he needed. Sophie invited Ethan to spend time at the Maple Hearth and the Greenwood Community Hub, immersing him in their day-to-day operations and showing him how the programs were run. Ethan shadowed the staff, learned about everything from sourcing ingredients to organizing community events, and even took part in one of Sophie's cupcake workshops. He marveled at how the spaces seamlessly blended business and community service, offering something for everyone. "How do you make it all work?" Ethan asked Sophie one afternoon as they cleaned up after a busy lunch service. "It's not just about making things work," Sophie said, her hands deftly wiping down a counter. "It's about listening to what the community needs and being flexible enough to adapt. Every town is different. What works here might not work in Ridgewood, but the principles are the same: connection, kindness, and opportunity." Planting the seeds in Ridgewood. With Tom and Sophie's guidance, Ethan returned to Ridgewood with renewed confidence and a clear plan. He rallied a group of like-minded residents, business owners, teachers, and even retired mill workers who shared his vision for revitalizing the town. They identified an abandoned school building as the perfect location for their project. Though it was in disrepair, its classrooms could be transformed into teaching spaces, its gymnasium could host community events, and its cafeteria could become a vibrant cafe. Ethan and his team launched a crowdfunding campaign, inspired by the success of the Greenwood Community Hub. Sophie and Tom lent their voices to the campaign, sharing their own story of resilience and community building. Donations poured in, not just from Ridgewood residents, but from supporters across the region who believed in the cause. A regional network. As Ridgewood's project took shape, Tom and Sophie realized they were on the verge of creating something even larger than they had anticipated. With Ridgewood, Greenwood, and the Maple Hearth, they now had 3 thriving spaces, but what if they could connect them? Sophie proposed creating a regional network of community hubs, each tailored to the unique needs of its town, but united by shared values and resources. They called it the Hearth Network, a name that symbolized warmth, connection, and the power of gathering together. The network would allow the hubs to collaborate on programs, share expertise, and support each other during challenging times. It would also open up new opportunities for mentorship, enabling chefs, farmers, and artisans to reach a wider audience. Tom, though officially retired, threw himself into the project with the same passion he had felt during the early days of the Maple Hearth. He traveled to Ridgewood to mentor Ethan and his team, sharing his knowledge and helping them navigate the inevitable challenges. The Ridgewood Revival. 2 years later, Ridgewood's community hub, called the Gathering Place, opened its doors. The transformation of the old school building was breathtaking, with vibrant murals, cozy seating areas, and a state-of-the-art kitchen. The opening ceremony drew a crowd that included visitors from Greenwood and Maple Lane, all eager to celebrate this new chapter for Ridgewood. Ethan stood on the stage, visibly emotional as he addressed the crowd. "This wouldn't have been possible without the support and inspiration of the Hearth Network," he said. "Tom, Sophie, and David showed us that no matter how far we've fallen, we can rise again, together." Tom, standing in the audience, felt a swell of pride. He had seen the spark of hope in Ethan's eyes that day at the maple hearth, and now that spark had grown into a blazing fire, igniting change in Ridgewood. An enduring legacy. In the years that followed, the Hearth Network expanded to include hubs in 5 additional towns, each one uniquely designed to serve its community. The network became a model for other regions, inspiring similar initiatives across the country. Tom, now in his 80s, spent his days mentoring from the sidelines, content to see the seeds he had planted grow into a forest of possibilities. Sophie, ever the visionary, continued to lead the network with grace and determination, always finding new ways to innovate and expand. One evening, as Tom sat with Sophie on the porch of the Greenwood Community Hub, he reflected on how far they had come. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in shades of gold and pink. "You know," Tom said, his voice soft, "I never imagined all this when Sophie handed me that first box of cupcakes." Sophie smiled, her eyes shining with gratitude. "It's funny how the smallest things can change everything." As the stars began to twinkle above them, Tom felt a deep sense of peace. The legacy of the Hearth Network wasn't just about the cafes or the programs. It was about the connections they had built, the lives they had touched, and the hope they had spread. It was a legacy that would endure for generations, proving that even the smallest acts of kindness could ripple outward and change the world.